أكثر ذكرى هادم اللذات. This is a narration that can be found in At-Tirmidhi, as well as Ibn Majah and maybe a few others. And it's a narration of the Prophet ﷺ in which he says, make abundant remembrance of the Hadim al-Laddat, where it could be translated as like the destroyer of pleasures. And I wanted to comment on this today. I had written a couple things on social media this morning. There were a couple of events over the last couple of days that brought this to mind. As many of you know, there's a rapper, an artist named Nipsey Hussle, who was unfortunately gunned down here in the Los Angeles area. And then there was another young woman, a student, who was killed, that was lured. I guess she thought that the assailant was like her Uber driver or something, and the man, for no logical apparent reason, killed her. And even something that most of you won't know, a close friend of mine, his brother was taken off of life support today. And this can all seem really kind of grim, but it's a reminder that the words of the Prophet ﷺ, are worthy of consideration, because they bring us back to reality. And most certainly, death is a reality that we have to remember and confront. But, to speak to the first two, the artist that was killed in LA and this woman, I believe it was in South Carolina, I wrote something this morning talking about morality, and that morality is not a partisan issue, that there isn't a liberal or conservative morality. There's revelation and there's what's right and wrong. And what I find on issues of morality is that there tends to be tremendous partisanship. So when there is when there's an African American who is shot by a white assailant, the black community, we will often, of course, become incensed because of how this is a cold reminder of the brutality that our ancestors, once faced, and that, some of us today also continue to face. But then when it's not, or if it doesn't fit that particular framework that we've been coached as a community to be incensed about, then it's kind of almost in some ways of saying it's normalized, that we accept it. We only accept it when the perpetrator fits a particular kind of phenotype or archetype, but if it doesn't, then we don't become incensed. It also shows that, and I had said this morning, that the only way to make society wholesome again is by committing oneself to a moral framework, a moral mindset, committing oneself to revelation, and that, as we have seen in the black community, which we can sometimes use as like a, as a barometer, how can I put this? When we look at the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years of activism and other things in the black community, we can see that neither ethics or legislation has really produced any results for us. That the only way, personally, that I see the way forward is a recommitment to God, a recommitment to morality. That morality is the only thing that can really govern the human being, because it's an internal thing. We have more rules on the book than you can, than you can count. And yet our increased legalization and legislation and all that, none of this has changed people wanting to murder one another. These cowards that killed, this gentleman in Los Angeles, it requires a rolling back. Like, what led them to that point? What led them to that point? What developed them into being immoral creatures? To me, this is like the heavy lifting that nobody really wants to do. And with all due respect to a lot of Muslim activists, I feel like we have allowed ourselves to be kind of taken into this arena of activism, which activism is fine, but we've allowed ourselves to be taken into this arena where, we're not really the ones who are writing the script. And therefore, often we kind of, we hear like racism. Okay, fine. But not all problems that black people face or other people or society faces are all due to racism. And that, sure, racism is a problem, and we should combat it, and we should deal with it. But even racism in itself cannot be legislated away. I don't really think you'll be able to. And we've seen, look, we passed laws that gave black folks the legal right to vote and so on and so forth. And as we can clearly see over this last 3 or 4 years, right, that, a lot of people's hearts didn't change. Or at least they certainly didn't change because of anything being of a certain legality, right? And in terms of ethics, well, many things that are ethical are immoral. We talked about this in the Islam in Depth class, reading from Muhammad Daras's book about the moral worldview of the Quran. And I gave the example that, a person that might be an avowed rapist, there's a thing called, like attorney-client privilege. And if, it's the job of the attorney essentially to, try to get the person off if that's what the client wants, even though they clearly. So there are many things that can be ethical but not moral. But most importantly, morality has no partisan. You're really it's about what God has revealed and demonstrated and showed the human being, that this is the best methodology to govern yourselves. Now, whether you choose to have a democracy or a republic or blah, 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 none of that really matters. What matters, over that, we can have a conversation about which one we might particularly like or is better or not, but even above that is just what is the commitment to morality. And I said, we've seen kind of the proof in the pudding that over the last, say 100 years or so, we have seen where we've had a number of so-called religious revolutions, right? So-called Islamic revolutions, whether it's in Iran, Algeria, other places. None of those has really produced squat, just to be honest. They haven't produced anything, because you cannot overnight impose morality top down on people. It just isn't going to work. It has to be cultivated from within. That's why I said with the perpetrators that killed this man in Los Angeles, or the man that killed this woman in South Carolina, where along the way in the path or trajectory of their life were they failed to be given adequate instruction in morality? Was it perhaps that they grew up in a broken household or this or that? Or, I mean, it cannot just simply be about passing laws. Passing laws will not change society for the better.